You know that silence that comes before a storm? Well, that's exactly what it was like inside my house. It wasn't a bad silence, the kind full of arguments, but a strange, almost timid silence, as if every word was afraid of bothering anyone. Lucas, my 16-year-old son, spent most of his time locked in his room. I understood. After all, adolescence has its phases. Even so, my mother's heart missed his voice echoing through the house, the laughter that once filled that same space. My routine was the same as always. Wake up early, make coffee, rush to work, come back at night and try to talk a little before he hid behind his headphones again. Sometimes I wanted to start a conversation, ask how school was going, if he still dreamed of studying engineering like he used to say when he was little. But the words remained stuck, as if an invisible wall had risen between us. I knew this distance was natural, that every child grows up and needs space. But deep down, I carried the guilt of having lost myself a little after his father passed away. From that day on, my strength became armor, and perhaps I forgot to show him that I also feel fear, also get tired, also need comfort. At night, sometimes, we would stay together in the living room, each immersed in our own world, him with his cell phone, me with memories. The clock made an almost irritating noise, as if marking each second of the growing distance. I looked at him and saw a boy, almost a man, broad shoulders, a firm gaze, but still the same boy who once held my hand to cross the street. It was there, in that silence, that I felt something was about to change. I didn't know what or when, but a mother's heart understands the signs even when reason insists on ignoring them. And strangely, a premonition began to grow inside me. Soon, something would happen. Something that would force us to look at each other again, without masks, without walls, just mother and son, face to face in the middle of the storm. Losing Lucas's father was like seeing the ground open up right beneath my feet. Back then, he was only 10 years old, and I became an expert at pretending everything was okay. I thought protecting Lucas meant hiding my suffering, that if he saw me strong, maybe he could stay a child a little longer. But the truth is, every tear I swallowed came back in the form of distance between us. The first few months were a blur. I remember waking up, making coffee, and going through the day on autopilot, as if living inside a gray dream. Work became my safe haven and my escape. I worked overtime, accepted any project, all to avoid arriving home early and facing that silence heavy with memories. His shirts were still hanging in the closet, the scent of his cologne lingered, and every corner of the house seemed to murmur the name I was trying to forget, Andre. Lucas, on the other hand, reacted differently. He didn't scream, he didn't cry. He just kept quiet. Little by little, he closed himself off inside a world I couldn't reach. At first, I tried to force conversations, asking about school, friends, if he missed his father. He would answer with short phrases, and I, tired of my own emptiness, would give up. Time passed, and that silence became our way of interacting. Sometimes, I rummaged through the boxes stored at the back of the closet. Old photos, notes, drawings Lucas made for his father, and I feel a lump tighten in my throat. The hours seem to echo what was left unsaid, the postponed I love yous, the interrupted hugs, the words trapped in the fear of crying again. The hardest part of dealing with absence isn't the absence of the body, but the absence of the little things, the sleepy good morning, the smell of coffee mixed with laughter, the distracted touch of someone who loved without needing to say it. This absence weighs more heavily on ordinary days, when nothing seems to happen, when the weight of daily life falls on our shoulders and we realize that love still exists, but has lost its voice. I looked at my son and saw, in every restrained gesture, the same emptiness that consumed me. We were two silent worlds orbiting the same roof. And, without realizing it, I learned to survive, not to live. But life, with its peculiar stubbornness, always finds a way to make us face what we try to forget. And, at that point in our story, everything that was dormant began, slowly, to awaken. Saturday began like so many others. I woke up early, made coffee, called Lucas about 3 times, and he, as always, took forever to get out of bed. We argued over silly things. He wanted to go out with his friends before tidying his room. I complained about his cell phone that seemed like an extension of his hand. Nothing out of the ordinary between mother and son. The sun streamed through the window, life continued its predictable rhythm, and I thought with some relief that perhaps that day would be peaceful. But sometimes, a phone call is all it takes to turn everything upside down. When the phone rang, I immediately knew something was wrong. It was Kayo's mother, Lucas's best friend. Her voice trembled, between sobs and broken sentences. There was an accident. Kayo is in the hospital. Those were the only words I could understand. At that moment, time stopped. The walls seemed to close in, the air became heavy. Suddenly, I felt my heart race as if the past had come back to haunt me. An old scene invaded my mind. The policeman standing at my door, his sad look, the envelope in his hands, the same broken tone of voice. Andre, my husband, had also been in an accident. I looked at Lucas. His smile had vanished. His face turned pale, and in his eyes I saw the same terror that consumed me. "Mom, he's going to be okay, right?" I asked, and my voice simply wouldn't come out. All I could do was take his hand and say, "Let's go." In the car, the silence was different this time. It was alive, pulsating, pierced by fear. The rain started suddenly, thick, beating forcefully against the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel as if it depended on it to keep the world in place. Lucas looked out the window, his fists clenched on his lap. Each red light seemed like a test of patience, each curve a cruel reminder of the past I tried to bury. And in the middle of the wet road between lightning and memories, I realized that nothing erases the fear of losing someone again. The old pain only sleeps, waiting for a new shock to awaken it. That day, an ordinary Saturday ceased to be so. And I didn't know it yet, but what awaited us at the hospital was much more than a visit. It was the beginning of something that would change our lives forever. The rain lashed against the windshield so hard that the wipers could barely keep up. The drops accumulated, distorting the streetlights, turning the road into a blur of light and shadows. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, I don't know if from fear or from memories. Lucas remained motionless beside me, his eyes fixed on the road, his body tense as if a sudden movement could worsen everything. The sound of the tires on the water made me tense, but the worst part was his silence, heavy, suffocating. I tried to break the tension. "Everything will be all right, son." He took a few seconds to answer, his voice choked. "Mom, Kayo was with me yesterday." If he didn't finish the sentence. I felt my throat close up. I wanted to say something comforting, but fear held me back. "He'll be okay. The worst is over," I lied, perhaps to myself. Suddenly, he exploded. "You always say that. That everything's fine, that everything will be all right. But what if it isn't?" The words cut deep. "Lucas, don't talk like that." "Yes, I do," he shouted. "You act like the world is going to collapse every time I leave the house. I'm not your father. I'm not going to abandon you too." Those words hit me harder than any storm outside. I let out a heavy sigh. "Do you think I want to hold you back, son? I'm afraid. Since I lost your father, it feels like the rest of me is trying to protect you even from the air. It's wrong, I know. But all I have left is you." He didn't answer. He just looked out the window, his face a mixture of anger and compassion. The drive to the hospital seemed endless, but upon arriving, everything dissolved in a second when we saw Kayo's mother crying in the hallway and, soon after, the doctor saying the boy was stable. A minor cut, a huge scare. It was in that instant that I felt my body relax. My legs weakened, and before I fell, Lucas caught me. We stayed there, embraced, without saying anything. I was sobbing, he was breathing rapidly, his heart pounding against my chest. The rain was still falling outside, but inside the hospital, time seemed to have stopped. "I don't want to see you afraid of me, Mom," he said softly. "I just want to live." I caressed his face, wet with tears, mine and his. "I know, my love. And I promise. I'll try." In that tear-soaked embrace I realized, my son was no longer a boy, and I needed to let him grow. We left the hospital together, under the same drizzle that now seemed almost gentle. For the first time in a long time, we walked side by side, not as mother and child, but as two people finally willing to listen to each other. Without realizing it, the storm that surrounded us had begun to pass. The house seemed suspended in time when we returned from the hospital. The sound of the rain still echoed outside, soft now, almost a whisper. The scent of wet earth wafted through the half-open window, mingled with the distant sound of fading thunder. Lucas went upstairs to his room without saying anything. And honestly, I wouldn't have known what to say either. Silence, once again, was there between us. But this time, it was different. It didn't weigh us down, it didn't hurt. It was a silence that demanded a pause, a breath healing. I sat on the sofa, still in my soaked coat, and stared into nothingness. Images from the day came and went like scenes from a movie I couldn't stop watching. The phone call, the road, the fear etched on my son's face, the hug in the hospital. I felt a confusing mix of relief and guilt. Why did it take so much fear for me to tell him how important he is to me? I picked up a notebook I always keep by the sofa, the same one where I usually write shopping lists and reminders, and began to write. It wasn't for anyone to read. It was for me. Or for him. A letter without an addressee, but with everything I never had the courage to say. Son, sometimes I think I learned to love you like someone trying to balance on the edge of a precipice, afraid of falling, but unable to retreat. Since the day your father left, love has become my way of resisting, and also my shield. I protected you too much, I know. I made silence a shelter, when in reality it only increased the distance between us. Today on the road in the middle of the storm, I realized that my fear isn't you getting hurt. It's losing you without having said everything. The words came out with tears. The raindrops hit the window as if they wanted to write what I never had the courage to say. I stayed there, listening to the sound of the water running down, until I noticed something curious. The sound of the rain was decreasing, and little by little, a pale light began to appear on the horizon. I got up and went to the window. There were still clouds in the sky, but between them, a timid trace of sun was beginning to appear. I thought that maybe life was just like that. The rain never really goes away, but if you have the courage to open the window, the day always tries to dawn again. And on that morning that was already dawning, I decided, I would no longer let words be lost in silence. On Sunday morning, the house was enveloped in a calm silence, the kind that comes after a storm. The sun streamed in through the cracks in the window, streaking the floor with golden lines. I had a leisurely coffee, trying to believe that the worst was truly over. Lucas was still sleeping, tired from so many emotions in the last 24 hours. I decided to take the opportunity to tidy his room, a mother's thing. Trying to bring order to what's within reach, since life sometimes insists on being too messy. I started by folding clothes, picking up books, putting away headphones and papers scattered on the desk. That's when I saw, at the bottom of a drawer, a folded envelope yellowed with age. The paper was a little crumpled, with the word Dad written in large trembling letters. For a moment, I hesitated. Was it wrong to open it? But at the same time, something inside me told me that this letter hadn't appeared by chance. I sat on the edge of the bed and, with my heart racing, unfolded the envelope. The note was short, written in childish handwriting, but each word weighed like a stone. Hi Dad. Mom is sad and doesn't talk to me anymore. I try to be strong like you, but sometimes it hurts too much. I wish you would come back, even if just for a few minutes, so we could have dinner together. I promise I won't complain about the vegetables. I wanted to tell you that I made the school team. Mom was happy, but she didn't really smile. I think she misses you every day. Me too. From your son, Lucas. My hands trembled. Lines blurred before my tearful eyes. Each word of that note was a cry for help that I never knew how to listen to. While I was burying myself in work, trying to survive the pain, my son was sinking in silence, trying to be the adult I expected him to be. The letter was from 4 years ago. 4 years. All that time I thought he didn't need to talk about his father anymore, when in reality he just couldn't find anyone to listen. I closed my eyes and felt a mixture of guilt and tenderness. I had underestimated him, thought he was strong for not crying, when, in fact, being strong would have meant asking for help. I carefully kept the note, like someone holding a jewel too fragile. There was the most sincere portrait of my son. Not the quiet teenager, but the boy who still carried the weight of a poorly understood goodbye. At that moment, I understood. The unexpected moment that would change our lives hadn't started with the phone call about the accident, but with that forgotten piece of paper. It was the past asking to be heard, the silent love finally trying to find its voice. And I promised myself that, this time, I would listen. I thought all night about whether or not I should show the note to Lucas. Each time I reread those words, something inside me broke, and at the same time, rebuilt itself. That child he had been still lived within him. The boy who only wanted me to truly smile was there, waiting for a gesture from me. I decided I couldn't postpone it any longer. When he came down for breakfast, still half asleep, I watched him for long seconds. It was curious how time could change so much and, at the same time, leave certain details intact. The way he scratched the back of his neck when he got nervous, his curious gaze, so similar to his father's. I took a deep breath and sat down in front of him. "Lucas, I found something of yours while I was tidying your room," I said, handing him the note. "I think it's important that we read it together." He looked at the paper, recognized it immediately, and paled. "Mom, where did you find this?" "In your drawer." I didn't mean to invade anything, it was unintentional. "But son." I read it. For a moment, he was silent, his eyes fixed on the crooked letters of his own childhood. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I wrote it on the anniversary of my father's death. I was afraid of making you sad, so I never gave it to you." I felt a lump in my throat. "And I, trying not to sadden you, kept quiet too." I tried to smile, but my voice faltered. In the end, we spent all these years trying to protect each other, and we only increased the emptiness. He raised his eyes, and in the wet glint in them I saw the 12-year-old boy again. "I missed him so much, and you too. I thought that if I showed how much it hurt, you would suffer more." I took his hand and held it firmly. "Son, I was already suffering. But I learned that love isn't about hiding the pain to spare the other person, it's about sharing it so it becomes lighter." We stayed there, hand in hand, without another word. Deep down, none was necessary. Forgiveness didn't come with a heroic phrase. It came with a simple look, a hint of a smile, a silent cry that mixed the past and the present. Later, without planning it, we both had the same idea, to visit our father. The late afternoon sun was warm, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. We picked up a small bouquet, and when we arrived at the cemetery, the world seemed to slow down. Lucas stood for a few minutes looking at the name engraved on the tombstone. Then he knelt down, placed the flowers and said, almost in a whisper, "Dad, take care of us from there, okay? Because down here we're still learning." I closed my eyes. Not to pray, although in a way it was also a prayer. I closed my eyes to keep that moment inside me, to never forget the sound of my son's peaceful voice. We stood side by side, without saying anything. The wind passed gently, playing with the leaves. And for the first time in years, the silence between us was light. When we left, the sky was tinged with a golden hue that seemed like a gift. Lucas walked a little ahead, tall, serene, mature. And I watched him with a peaceful heart. I realized that love hadn't left us on the day of the accident, it had only slept within us, waiting for the right moment to awaken. That next day, I understood that a new beginning doesn't arrive with fireworks or solemn promises. It arrives in calm steps, in a simple "Mom, shall we go together?" and in the embrace that seals everything that time couldn't erase. Several months have passed since that day, the day a simple phone call became the guiding thread of all our changes. Sometimes I still find myself reliving every detail: the sound of the rain, the hospital, the forgotten note, the hug at the cemetery.